Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead, I know people are still trickling in, but I'll go ahead and introduce our group speakers this afternoon. Dr. Catherine Yu is a family physician at Health Access Thorncliffe Park and Michael Garron Hospital. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of Toronto. She's a passionate advocate for her patients. In her role as a medical director, she has been working diligently to establish strong collaborative relationships between the health, social, and educational agencies in Thorncliffe Park. Through these partnerships, a second-phase clinic was established in the neighborhood in 2017 to help address access barriers to pediatrics and primary care in a community with complex needs and challenges associated with the social determinants of health. Munira Khilji is a strong advocate for better supports and families and services for families of children with autism. Munira has worked with the Thorncliffe Collaborative to partner with the Geneva Center for Autism, a relationship that has allowed for engagement of parents and training opportunities that are accessible and culturally sensitive. Currently, Munira coordinates a school-based pediatrics clinic for Health Access Thorncliffe that focuses on challenges with learning, growth, behavior, and development. Leading the Thorncliffe Collaborative for Muslim families for the past 5 years, Safeera Mulla has been advocating for culturally responsive care in the neighborhood of Thorncliffe Park, especially for families of children with autism. Working closely with agencies such as Geneva Center for Autism, Children's Aid Society, CMHA, and most recently Health Access Thorncliffe Park, her role as a community liaison has been instrumental in building bridges of understanding between service providers and community. In addition, Safeera is currently also a case manager for SAAAC Autism Center's Mobile Developmental Outreach Clinic. Thank you.
We don't have a mic, I guess. I want to make sure that people hear us in the back are okay with their voices. Great. So good afternoon, and thank you very much for spending a few minutes with us. We're very excited, the three of us, to be here to share some of our experiences in Thorncliffe Park. And I hope that our stories will bring joy to your hearts, because we have been working hard at actually trying to implement some of these models of care that are out there to help us with better access in our neighborhood. We'll just start by introducing Thorncliffe Park briefly to you. It's a diverse neighborhood in East Toronto with a population of about 30,000. And for many newcomers with young families, Thorncliffe Park is an ideal neighborhood to settle in on first arrival into Canada. Over the past decades, Thorncliffe Park has become one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Toronto. And I know this is a busy slide, and I borrowed this from the TC Lyn's East Toronto sub-region slide decks. But what I wanted to highlight here is the fact that Thorncliffe Park has one of the highest proportions of children and youth in all of Canada. About a third of the residents of Thorncliffe Park are children under the age of 14. And the local K-5 elementary school has a population of about 2,000 students, making it the largest elementary school in North America. Wow. So the three of us have been privileged to be part of the journey of many of the young families in these schools, and we'd like to share some of our experiences as we witnessed. I've lost my... As we witnessed how positive change were effectively implemented in the neighborhood to make access better for the children and families. Munira is here. She's going to tell us a story of how things were many years ago.
Catherine says many years ago. I feel like maybe decades, so that's what it feels like. But really, I'd say about maybe 10, 12 years ago. So if you think about the journey we traveled about 11 years ago, first-time mother who's maybe not new to the country, but is new to the city. Okay. She has an adorable, happy boy, about 11 months old. He loves to smile, but will not quite laugh out loud. Mom doesn't quite notice. He falls asleep very easily, but by humming to himself. And when I say humming, I don't mean like a lovely musical note. I mean like the distant humming of a lawnmower. So something like, and I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to, like that. So that's a lawnmower, right? He's also a first child, so his parents just think it's adorable, those sounds. He can make sounds, he gurgles, makes random noises. He can't quite say the words mama or baba yet. He can sit up, but only when propped up by cushions. That's when his mom, naive, first-time mom, starts to take notice. And maybe she's slightly concerned. She goes to his pediatrician, who at that time was in Ottawa. And the response to her query was, I'd like to put it out to you all. What do you think the pediatrician said when he was asked why her son was delayed?
He's a boy.
He's a boy! Thank you! That's exactly what it was. And naive first-time mom said, oh, okay, he's a boy. And she moved along. When this little boy saw his mom napping, he would take fistfuls of her hair, his hair under here, and he would pull as hard as he could. He would try to kick, pummel his little fist into her belly, this very pregnant mom, then wake up in tears. This family didn't know anyone in this new city of Toronto, Massachusetts. His baby sister was born at Michael Garrett Hospital, and a name given for her to follow for general pediatrics. This family had no primary care attachment, and that's where they were connected. The little boy's care is transferred over to the same general pediatrician. He's at about 17 months old when he has his first checkup since moving to the city. As the pediatrician goes through this developmental checklist, Mom becomes slowly alarmed, as the answers to all of her questions are no. That's why this is challenging. The pediatrician then goes on to say it's likely there is a global developmental delay that needs to be looked into further. As it's investigated and as everyone works through a diagnosis of global developmental delay that's secondary to a genetic disorder, the next few months become an absolute blur. Holland Bloorview, Sick Kids Genetics, early on, Bond Street Nursery, Surrey Place, I hope I'm not missing anyone, I need to give them all credit, City Kids, then after that come applications for special services at home, and assistance for children with severe disabilities, and somebody throw in President's Choice, and Jennifer Ashley Children's Charity, I got it right. All of this is a blur. Fast forward another year, when Mom mentions to the developmental pediatrician that he tends to repeat everything I say. Do you want a cookie? Want a cookie? Do you want milk? Want milk? Want to go park? Go park. That's how it sounded. And that's when we realize there's a red flag there that needs to be looked into. The little boy, now 4, is in a diagnostic kindergarten, diagnosed with autism. Mom's not sure of the diagnosis because there's a genetic disorder as well. How do you know? How do you know? How do you know it's because of the delay? How do you know it's because he has that diagnosis? How do you know it's autism? She sits on this diagnosis, both parents, for a whole year. I'll preempt that by saying that while the diagnosis was, we took time to accept it, yeah, that's what we're talking about. No secret there. But while we held on to that diagnosis, we also knew that while our son was in a diagnostic kindergarten, he was getting all of the supports and services that he could have had at that time. Now, our son is, I'm not sure where we are. Thank you. Thank you for following the clicking. I don't multitask very well. Now our son is 12 years old. He's in an autism intensive support program. He has ABA therapy in a block, a 3-month block comes around approximately once a year. And we're proud to say he's come a really long way. But that being said, I also do wonder where this story was 11, 12 years ago, what it would have looked like with the way the supports are in Thorncliffe Park today.
Thank you, Munira, for sharing your story. So over the past several years, through the dedication and support of many community members and various agencies, we've been lucky in Thorncliffe Park. We now have better access to care. As the theme of this conference is around access, we'd like to share what steps we've taken in order to make this happen. Easier navigation to the right resource and the reduction of barriers to access has been facilitated through the establishment of the patient's medical home. I will speak more about this concept of the patient's medical home in a little later, but for now, suffice it to say that this home aspired to be the place that families would feel most comfortable in when they presented or discussed their personal and family health and medical concerns. Health Access Thorncliffe Park entered into a partnership agreement with the TDSB to bring health, education, and social services providers all under one roof to function as a team. In my role as the medical director and family physician and HATP, I was tasked to work on establishing organizational partnerships and designing health systems that improve the delivery of primary care in the neighborhood. Michael Guerin Hospital became a supportive partner in our school-based clinic. The leadership team of the hospital, as part of our strategic plan of building community, encouraged the pediatrics and family practice departments to support the work that it entails to have a multidisciplinary team that serves the whole community.
So in my role as the intake and navigation counselor for the clinic, part of my role actually became establishing the school-based clinic and how it works. And what that means is bringing providers from different organizations together under one roof to help benefit the community. Within that role, basically I established and enhanced relationships with frontline workers from all three sectors, so from the TDSB, from our partners at Michael Guerin Hospital, from the social services agencies that work within the community, bringing them all together to be able to create a comprehensive care plan that speaks to the children that we see in the school. I'm so glad I'm not doing it.
We lost our cursor.
I just
We did such a great job in Thorncliffe Park, but we're technically challenged here. I'm sorry. I don't know where our cursor went, so here.
I can't actually get to the script at all. Okay, while you play with that. The SAAAC Autism Center's Mobile Developmental Outreach Clinic, as known as MDOC, was a key partner in the patient's medical home in the school. As the case manager for the MDOC project and the lead for the Thorncliffe Collaborative, I ensured that children who were not in school yet also got access to developmental assessments in a timely manner. Oftentimes, this meant using some innovative, culturally appropriate approaches to facilitate connections between families, healthcare providers, and community resources.
So we wanted to be thoughtful about our presentation, so we wrote everything out that we wanted to say. So now we need to stay on script, but, yeah, okay. So what is the patient's medical home? And briefly, many academics, healthcare systems planners, and strategists have decided various models of integrated care around the world, and most health systems experts agree that the most successful models are those that are anchored in primary care. I think some of you have already heard me sort of in my platform today, which I'm grateful for as a panelist, that primary care needs to be at the heart to support the work that we're trying to do when it comes to access to care. So the patient's medical home that I am referring to is not necessarily the bricks and mortar that is built to house team members, though the TDSB has kindly let us use their space in Thorncliffe Park Public School to house our clinic. The patient's medical home consists of the team members whose work are guided by a number of key principles. I just want to say that I certainly didn't produce this, and I borrowed this and reproduced this from the College of Family Physicians of Canada. And the key principles that we wanted to apply and have applied in our school-based clinic include Number 1, our commitment to accessible care. Number 2, our patient and family partnered care. Number 3, continuity of care. And number 4, having a comprehensive team-based care with family physician leadership. And number 5, supporting community adaptiveness and social accountability. Okay. With our work, we have been and continue to be guided by the principles of socially accountable care, which demands advocacy on the part of providers like us to speak out on behalf of marginalized populations about the social conditions that affect their health and wellness. The advocacy work that has been done in Thorncliffe Park has been numerous and largely implemented at the grassroots level. For the purposes of our stories today, I would like to share this framework, which I believe some of you have already seen. For our school-based clinic, we used as an approach for implementing change to enhance access to care in the neighborhood, the framework, again, this is from the College of Family Physicians of Canada. Our work involved identifying and acting on the barriers to accessible care at the micro, meso, and macro levels. In the next few slides, we'd like to share some examples of the barriers, enablers, and action plan for each level of advocacy by sharing some of our stories from the front line. Here's Munira again to tell us.
I'm
More
back.
of a
I tell
story.
stories. I do that better than clicking. So the story I like to tell, it's complex, it might sound complex, but it might also sound very familiar. And I feel it will reflect accurately the way in high priority neighborhoods often clients come in. It's not a single issue, it's very complex needs that have to be taken care of from different angles. So with this story, then I hope that Catherine and I will tease out those different levels that she's just talked about. So I want to talk about one little guy, we'll call him Ali. He was referred to the local early on center. He was referred by the early on center in our community to SAAAC's Mobile Developmental Outreach Clinic. I know Dr. Siva Balan will be giving more details about this clinic and how it works in the next talk, so I don't want to take away from that. Anyhow, there were concerns regarding delayed speech and communication challenges, as well as sensory difficulties for this little boy. He was very sleepy during his appointment. Dr. Siva Balan was only able to take a history, and the boy fell asleep. Now, one thing I know this sounds like a lot of detail, but it highlights very intricately how our partnerships work. Because Dr. Siva Balan is part of the Mobile Developmental Outreach Clinic, he also works with us in the school-based pediatric clinic. So little boy fell asleep and he said, Munira, can we just have him come into the school clinic? I just need to do the radar on him. And that's what we did. Little boy, his score came out to be about a 25 or 30, so that's a fairly high score. At this point, we had generated a referral to Michael Guerin Hospital. At about the same time, the child and his mom also registered for primary care at Health Access Thorncliffe Park. This mom and son had a very complex social situation that I will elaborate on in the next slide. Anyhow, what happened is, while that referral had been generated, back in the school clinic, we also had our developmental pediatrician coming in the following week. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Cynthia Goldfarb working with us. And when she came in, she wanted to understand exactly what was the urgency in this situation and why we needed him to be seen earlier. When she asked for more clarification, she understood that it was our hope to be able to give her some sort of financial stability and priority in the daycare system. This child was in a very precarious situation, and it was almost certain that he had autism. Through this, again, I'm going to highlight how intricately these partnerships work, is he was able to be seen within the next 2 weeks by doctors in Goldfarb. And throughout this time, Mom was also aware that there were locally based parent training workshops that were happening that she could come into, she could access, and in the meantime, learn of strategies that she could use to support her son in the meantime. Now, while we were supporting Ali and his mom, issues of food security, precarious housing, and unstable legal status came to light. Mom was a refugee claimant with an expired work permit. So the work permit wasn't renewed because she hadn't been able to work on the last one. Why? Because while she had secured a childcare subsidy, there were no daycare spaces. She was subletting an apartment. She couldn't lease one because she wasn't working full-time. And why wasn't she working full-time? Because she had no daycare. So you see how quickly that becomes this vicious cycle of people not talking to each other across ministries, across services, and I know I'm completely off script, Catherine, but it's simply about how people not talking to each other lead to somebody so vulnerable into such a situation. With support from the community, from our healthcare team, we were able to secure a daycare spot for him. Our social workers, they supported the appeal to the refugee claimant status in the hope that Ali and his mom could stay in Canada. One day, now I talked about precarious housing. She was subletting an apartment from every 2 months she was moving around because she would have to leave. There came a point when she came into our clinic and she told one of our team members, I'm going to call Children's Aid Society. I think I'm going to pick my child up because I'm going to be on the streets. And if I'm going to be on the streets, at least that way I know that my son is safe and cared for. The good news is we were able to find a shelter in time. So while that shelter was not in the community, it was about 25, 30 kilometers away, we were able to secure a roof over their head. To add to the complexity of the situation is even though our little Ali was born in Canada, he's not eligible for any funding for assistance for children with severe disabilities, for the special services at home funding, because of his mother's rejected refugee claimant status. Yep, so we know that's right. That's right. So the only funding she has right now is Ontario Works. Ali continues to face sensory overload, no calm spaces during the course of his day. From the almost hour-and-a-half long commute between the daycare, from where they are at the shelter to the daycare, they have to leave at 6:30 in the morning to get there for 8 o'clock. At that time, I might add, the dining hall in the shelter is not open, so the mother is given food in a little Ziploc bag, maybe a croissant, a muffin, that he has to try and eat along the way for the mom and son. And mind you, we're talking about a child with autism in a bus, in rush hour, lots of people staring at him, and he's supposed to eat his breakfast there. Along with the added to the complexity of that, the noise and the inflexibility of the daycare that is yet to accommodate his needs. Added to the complexity of that, the hour-and-a-half long ride back, the din of the dining hall, the hum of all the fluorescent lights, and the unfamiliarity of all the textures and flavors of the food in the shelter. And to add to that, I have to say, I'm sorry, Catherine, I just constantly go off script, is again, when we talk about rules and regulations that are put in place to make a system work smoothly, sometimes we have to be able to bend those rules. I like to say rules are made to be not broken, but bent occasionally. And this is one of those situations where mom is not allowed to take food into the room because, well then, you can't, it'll be messy, and then we'll have roaches in the room, and you can't have that. She says, I'll vacuum it, give me a vacuum, I'll vacuum it. No, you can't do that. Ultimately, after a lot of advocacy from all of the providers on the healthcare team, mom is allowed to take up food for the son, but she has to eat in the dining hall because your son has the issue, not you. So in the course of the day, from 6:30 in the morning when they leave to when they enter their room, mom and son have no time to actually sit down in a calm space together. And with all of that stimulation, that little boy has no time to actually properly eat. Our dietitian continues to work with them along with social work to be able to figure out how. We often sit down as a team and we think, how do we support this mom? How do we support this child? But the truth is, when we talk about autism, and we talk about how there needs to be consistency and structure and routine. In any of this scenario, there's none for this child. So when we talk about how we need to, I'm sorry, Catherine, I'm so sorry. But when we talk about diagnosis, that is the first step. There are so many other complexities in the children that we see from day to day across Toronto that need to be addressed in a systemic way, which I know Catherine will listening. Oh, that's good.
It's going to be hard for me to thank you, Munira, to give justice to putting all the micro level of social advocacy work that Munira has described to you already. But just to give an attempt to do that, here is what we've done. Some barriers to access that we've identified at the micro level include the typical wait times to obtain an assessment and the difficulties around navigation to resources that address the social determinants of health. Some enablers for our work included our relationships with a developmental pediatrician at Michael Garron Hospital and with the primary health care team at Health Access Thorncliffe Park. And I'd just like to add that our primary health care team isn't what you might typically think of as a doctor or nurse primary care team. We've got a lot of interprofessional care team members that really do a lot of the frontline work for us. And many organizations feel concerned about the impact to their individual organizations when asked or mandated to integrate with other organizations. What I would say is that while the political tides will always be changing, at the end of the day, collaborative teams and partnerships are the key to our successes in tackling the issues around access to care. We are grateful for this opportunity and thank you very much.
We can open it up to questions for the next couple of minutes.
Before questions, sorry, I would like to acknowledge Dr. Safeera, who has just started working with us in our setup as also. Thank you, Dr. Safeera.
So you mentioned that TDSB is one of your partners. What's the involvement of the school board, aside from that's with clinicals, right?
So we have a formal partnership agreement with the TDSB. There are school clinic models across the city that you might have heard of. I think that was a key part to our work because I've heard of resources in the schools coming and going if you don't establish this formalized organizational partnership. What we've been lucky with is the principal of the school has really been very engaged. And what that means for us is we were able to co-design our work together. There are things that that are barriers there, whereas union rules might not allow us to bring in certain services. But because our clinic is also anchored in primary care, when we're not in the schools, they are not the TDSB as an organization. Principal and the school that we're working with has been collaborative. But when we're not in the school, all the work we do outside the school is not within their sort of direction, right? So we would certainly, if we know that the needs in the school are certain things, then we would try to provide it in primary care because we just have a holistic approach for our patients.
I was just listening to when you said it was important that you had the principal buying in and knowing that they're an advocate. So knowing that principals are sometimes time limited,
that makes me very shaky, but you're absolutely
right. Because a principal can completely change the culture of the school and what's allowed to happen in school. I'm just curious of how long you been? How long's it been going?
Well, Jeff Crane's been principal he's on his 6th year. This clinic is in its 3rd school year. What we've told him is if you decide to leave, you need to give us a year's heads up and a warm transfer to the new principal. In the process, Jeff also, because he's very supportive of the work and how he has seen it support the students in his school, he also does a good pitch for it to the superintendents as well. We tend to have a bit of a presence with the TDSB school trustees at their ward forums or coffee mornings or whatnot. And so with that, then we tend to spread the word on the work, and that way we hope that even if the principal changes, we'll have the support of the community and the other TDSB people that need to be on board?
That's a very good question. It is a risk that we worry about. What if the principal leaves? Then how does our model persist? But we do establish relationships at every level. So it's not just a principal. We know the psychologist well, the social worker well, the rest of the school support team well. Hopefully they don't all leave at the same time. And yes, we do establish an organizational partnership agreement that will still protect us from that risk.
Yeah, I guess that comes down to it, because sometimes you have choice to stay and sometimes you don't have choice to stay. So it's interesting. My daughter went to a school not far from so we're in the Broadview area, and there was actually students who, because of how full that elementary school is, came to the Torrens, to 100 Torrens. So it's interesting because I know their experience as students is probably not the same, unfortunately, as the ones who are living within.
The school also allows us to run workshops in there as well. So even with that, there's a lot of buy-in from them as well. They acknowledge how beneficial this is for their students, for their families, and in turn their teachers in their classes. Because the more assistance that those children are getting, the easier it becomes in the class. So there have been many changes to the schools with other staff. The school's the one that is still stuck around.
In the initial stage, how did you guys get the word out, or what was the turnout like?
In terms of patients being seen. Well, you know, I think fairly busy. You know, what I would say is that we didn't go in there because we designed ourselves to be in there. We were asked to be in there, and we had gotten a good sense because we've got community members that are working with us to understand really from their perspective, what do they want. So, I mean, we did go in with only a half a day a week of a clinic because we also didn't want to take resources away from Michael Garron Hospital, let's say, to put it into the school while they're waiting, twiddling their thumbs for patients to be seen. Yeah.
It took time basically to build an understanding of what we were trying to do. So first we started with, what is it that the community needs, and does it match up with what we think is needed? And so slowly as the word got out on what we were doing, now from half a day in our third year, now we're at 2 days a week. And constantly, like there's
2 days a week for the kids that we see at the school, but all the other follow-up visits to the rest of the family, all their social determinants of health are seen at 5-day-a-week clinic across the street.
It's kind of a strange question, but just because of the, I guess, barriers, how are you able to keep the person who moved to a shelter that's 20 minutes away? Do they not end up like out of your catchment area in terms of address, or does that not matter? Because usually I feel like we're in issues.
we as an organization, we continue to follow children, especially considering the type of care that we provide within the school clinic. We continue to follow them until they are successfully transitioned to another provider, and if that doesn't happen, drop them.
Yeah, I mean, I know.
It's not allowed because of barriers, right?
Right, yeah, and I know.
Even not allowed to fix the jobs.
Yeah, and I
Thank
guess,
you for asking that question.
I mean, the risk is that will we run out of capacity? I mean, we're very careful about that decision, and we do try to make sure we have a transition before we leave.
First of all, thank you for sharing your personal story. I think it's so important to hear those voices, and it really puts a face to what you're doing. And thank you for your work, and what an exciting model. I just had a particular question on the front line working with parents. I often hear the story of that they get a diagnosis, and that particular meeting with the doctor, with the pediatrician, they may get a piece of paper, or a phone number, an organization to contact, but then there's a bit of a purgatory time. I'm using that creatively, but at the time when they're sort of, wow, I have a diagnosis and I've got to get a hold of people, what do I do? It's filled with a lot of internet searches and things. And you're a doctor who's really interfacing with the services and the community work, which doesn't happen for a lot of pediatricians, right? That particular space right there where I get my diagnosis and that bridge, how could that be filled short of having this kind of amazing structure in place? But let's say for other communities, that how could a pediatrician, for example, know more about the practice on the ground in their local area that they could bridge and make that purgatory shorter or easier?
Great question. I think immediately of two things when you ask that question. One is that we have an excellent case navigation counselor. So Munira is available all the time. She spends 1.0 FTE, so this is a full-time job for her. And she's accessible to the family. She knows the resources very well, and they can certainly call her and help if it's navigation support that they need to any of the resources. Then she can find the resource in the community. The second piece around where I think that purgatory timing can be filled is that we are fortunate to have access to e-consults. So electronic consults. I'm not sure if there are any family doctors in the room that use it. I found it very helpful. I get a response within 24 hours from psychiatrists, other specialists and healthcare providers that can advise us on implementing a care plan even before they physically see the patient. So we see children also with mental health disorders, and one story that I'd like to share is the child with selective mutism. We had to wait for 6 months for a child psychiatrist to see, but before that 6 months came around, we, through an e-consult, got the treatment plan suggestion and implemented it with the help of the school teachers. And so within a couple of months, the child was speaking in the class. We didn't need the child psychiatrist referral anymore. So those are our.
In addition to that, what I think is also that we continue to stay in touch with the TDSP person who coordinates all of the school clinics within the TDSP. So there's a lot of learning and sharing. So there's a lot of things that we're doing in our model that we're able to transfer that knowledge and share that around, and hopefully be able to support other school clinics in building up that model as well.
Thank you for your talk. I'm a pediatrician. I work in Scarborough. in the Thorncliffe Park neighborhood. One question I have for you, and this is a challenge that I've had in my own practice, is within the families and the patients that I see, I have a lot that are quote unquote lost to follow. And the lost to follow is really tough to know, for me to know how to follow up and manage these families. For example, from getting referrals, even from the MDOT clinic coming to my office, I get emails that say, oh, this child is this. They never actually make it to my office for the appointment for whatever reason. Or once I see them, if I refer them on to Floorview, or if I send them to SAAAC, or go and register for the Ontario Autism program, sometimes those things don't happen. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for me or any solutions on how I can minimize that. My own thought is that there are other barriers there that I'm not able to address, like transportation and housing security, things like that. But do you have any solutions for me?
Yeah, I think that we certainly hear this story very frequently, and I think the solution might not be that easy in that it requires resources, it requires money. So for us, the resource is actually our case navigator. Again, I'm going to bring it back to Munira. So we have funding for Munira's position, and she really takes care of the loss to follow-up pieces. So the care plan is actually visible to her, and she will follow up on the care plan with the families to make sure that they're connected to the right resources. It's not that easy to get. What's helpful for us is we have a hospital resource partner who helps us fundraise for our program, and across the city in terms of the school-based clinic programs. I don't know if you work in a school setting. The successful models seem to be the ones that have hospital resource partners that are actually working together with the frontline team. So if you're linked to a hospital, that might be one place to tap if they can provide the resource.
To answer your piece, I tend another thing is also, once the child is seen through the school clinic, then I communicate that back to the family physician if they're out in the community and not part of our primary care team. So I'll send a letter back letting the family physician know that they were seen, what the concern was, and what our follow-up plan looks like. So the family physician's in the loop, and hopefully that's another place at which the family can be followed.
Yes, primary care really should be playing a role and not dropping.
Perfect. Thank you.